Harvard man says inflation is a high-class problem. The absentee Secretary of Transportation says the supply chain crisis is happening due to a booming economy. And Propaganda Minister Psaki describes inflation as
So why
The
is it?
tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed.
all right. You know, in this country, we have the illusion of choice. Two parties, Democrats and Republicans. Meanwhile, in reality, you don't have any choice besides flipping the faces of the same coin. You're either ruled by the Goldman Sachs administration or the BlackRock administration, the Harvard administration or the Yale administration. Of course, both administrations work for the sole purpose of making the rich richer, the poor poorer, and making the middle class into an extinct species. For example, the Trump administration was in essence the Harvard/Goldman Sachs administration, since it favored graduates from these two criminal organizations to lead decision-making in the administration. Now we have the Biden administration, aka the BlackRock/Yale administration. Listen to some of these headlines. Two Biden aides will recuse on BlackRock issues as past ties pose questions. Here's another headline. BlackRock gains clout in Washington as Biden builds his team. Biden's new team, a good day for BlackRock and corporatism. Biden names BlackRock's Brian Deese as his top economic aide. BlackRock emerges as Wall Street player in the Biden administration. And of course, the BlackRock administration has a slight bias toward Yale graduates to lead the decision making. As a result, it is not a surprise that both Harvard and Yale enjoy billions of dollars in endowment every year, and their stock market gains are through the roof, or the roof, as certain assholes might say. Harvard's endowment swells by $11.3 billion as 20% of U.S. households lose all savings during the pandemic. Certainly, it helps to trade stocks via insider information that your graduates at the White House pass back to you. I wish I had a source in the White House to feed me insider information, yet luckily for me, I can just follow Nancy Pelosi's husband's trades, and therefore I don't need a mole in the White House. Now, I couldn't find a better example to illustrate for you the out-of-touch swamp that we call the Ivy League than this reptilian creature named Professor Jason Furman from Harvard. And if you are a student of Professor Furman, you have my empathy and prayers. Not only he is the dullest human being in history, but rumor has it that Professor Furman will not pass you before you stroke his ego. God forbid you challenge his rotten so-called intellect. And here are some of the views from this clown back in June about the economy and inflation. Take a look.
There's been a lot of very temporary inflation from a set of quirks related to the reopening. For example, used auto car prices have absolutely soared, and other prices are getting back to where they were pre-pandemic. I don't think anyone thinks the recent rate of price increase is going to continue. The question is, how much does it slow down? Does it slow down all the way back to the 2% increase every year we used to see? Or does it slow down less than that and we're left with something more like a 3% increase every year?
Now, I'm not a Harvard, Yale, or Wharton creature. I am a product of public colleges, where none lizards attend, and I got it right from the get-go. Back in January, I told you in this channel that we will face the biggest inflation crisis since the 1970s due to the reckless, insane policies from the Fed led by criminal Jay Powell, intended to expand the wealth gap in this country to extremes not seen since the slavery era back in the South, or the Roman Empire, or even ancient Egypt. No, I don't have a degree from Harvard, but I explained to you in this channel in details why the economy will eventually face stagflation, and here we are. But the geniuses from the Harvard and Yale institutions, who probably get paid millions of dollars to give you their best guess, didn't get it right. Have you noticed that almost every crisis has a Harvard or a Yale man behind it? Professor Furman says inflation will be at 3%. This is, of course, back in June. Well, the latest reading of the CPI exceeded 5%. And mind you, this is the CPI, aka the CP lie, due to its tendency of underestimating actual inflation in the economy.
I don't actually think 3% inflation would be terrible, but it depends. If policymakers tried to lower inflation from 3 to 2, that could be pretty painful. If wages don't keep up with prices, that would also be troubling. But if we want to operate the economy year in and year out at a higher inflation rate going forward, I don't see that as a problem personally. But I do think it's important to make policy based on the most realistic and accurate expectations for what's happening in the future. There's no danger of repeating the experience like the 1970s. The Fed learned that lesson. They'll never let inflation get to 10%, again. The 1960s is the model for what we're going through now. Inflation crept up from about 1.5% to about 5%. One of the troubling things in the 1960s was that wages didn't keep up with prices. And so people saw their purchasing power, their real wages, fall. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen now, but that is the scenario to be worried about. It's not a catastrophically terrible one by any stretch, but I don't think it's perfect either.
So Professor Furman said inflation is transitory. It is no big deal at 3%. And if it becomes a big deal, it's okay because wages will be rising. And if wages don't rise, it's also okay. It's not a big deal. Just buck up, man up, and face this inflation. What happened to bravery? And of course, here's an update to the inflation/supply chain crisis. Here is where we stand right now.
40% of U.S. imports come through this port and the neighboring port of Los Angeles. Much of it stuck for weeks in a giant backup at sea. 81 massive ships currently in line waiting to unload. We were there to see one of the ships that had docked. It's going to take 10 days to offload the 6,200 containers on this ship alone. But the time it takes to get that cargo to its final destination will be determined by other potential choke points in the supply chain. President Biden recently touted 24/7 operations here as a way to ease the backlog.
Today's announcement has the potential to be a game changer.
But so far, workers say not much has changed.
And now that inflation has become a full-blown economic crisis, triggering the worst supply chain disruption in this country's history, Professor Furman says inflation is a high-class problem. Stop bitching and whining. Just eat cake, What's wrong with cake? We need inflation to make the rich richer. To create jobs. Meanwhile, we have yet to recover the pre-pandemic unemployment rate. Millions remain unemployed and millions are quitting their jobs every single month. These are just some of the high-class problems that we have. And after spending trillions of dollars to pump the equities and real estate markets into hyper bubble territory, we have gained trillions in new added wealth to billionaires, the likes of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. We have also created the biggest inflation crisis since the 1970s and added an insane amount to the public debt, yet we continue to struggle with lousy unemployment numbers, hunger, and homelessness also got a lot worse since the so-called economic recovery began. The BlackRock administration, of course, endorsed this reptilian elitist thinking that inflation is a high-class problem and we should buck up and deal with it so we can continue to enjoy this booming economy. The gaslighting doesn't stop there. Professor Furman doubled down on his stance when confronted and tried to gaslight us into thinking that the supply chain woes are due to a booming and thriving economy.
I'll tell you what I think's going on in the economy. You need to keep two things in your head at once. One is inflation is real. Inflation is creating a problem for families, and we should do something about it. Number two, the reason we have this inflation is actually a good reason. That the unemployment rate has come down, that families got money, and people are buying more things than ever before. The problem isn't that our ports stopped working, it's that people are buying so much stuff that so much is trying to come through our ports right now. We have record volumes. That's both has a good side, a bad side. You need to keep both those in your
And a lot
head.
of people would say you saw it coming last February. You did very little about it. Why would the chief of staff retweet that?
I'm not hearing.
You should have the chief of staff on to ask him that question.
We put in
Again,
a lot
it's
of
important
requests
to
for
understand
that.
the reason
Continue.
we have. The reason that we're having this problem is that people are buying a lot. I was in the White House 12 years ago when we were suffering a really slow recovery. We didn't have these types of problems then.
My guess would be is that if you were paying $2 a gallon for gasoline a year ago and now it's over $4, that's not a high-class problem for anyone. Middle-class America is paying for that.
Americans are traveling more than they were a year ago. That's a good thing. Americans are spending more. They're spending more in restaurants. They're spending more on sporting goods. They're spending more on nights out. They're spending more on travel. That's all a really good thing. That's what's most important. In part, that's happening because every person in this country got a $2,000 check, or almost every person in this country got a $2,000 check earlier this year.
And here we have another one. Absentee Transportation Secretary Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who've been swinging and smiling like an idiot while the country is suffering from the worst and biggest transportation crisis in its history. Mayor Pete says, "What problems? We don't have any problems. These are just symptoms of a booming economy." Mayor Pete is also gaslighting us with the same garbage narrative.
We're seeing major supply chain disruption in the U.S. right now, causing everything from higher prices to longer waits for products. Moody's warns that these supply chain disruptions, quote, will get worse before they get better, unquote. Do Americans need to prepare ourselves for this to get worse before it gets better?
Well, certainly a lot of the challenges that we've been experiencing this year will continue into next year, but there are both short-term and long-term steps that we can take to do something about it. Look, part of what's happening isn't just the supply side, it's the demand side. Demand is off the charts. Retail sales are through the roof. And if you think about those images of ships, for example, waiting at anchor on the West Coast, every one of those ships is full of record amounts of goods that Americans are buying because demand is up, because income is up, because the president has successfully guided this economy out of the teeth of a terrifying recession.
And it gets even worse. We have this hack, Michelin Menard, a propagandist at the Washington Post, who says, "Stop ranting about short-staffed stores and the supply chain woes. Stop ranting. Man up, woman up, buck up for the country. Buck up so we can make the rich richer. Just a little more. We need a trillionaire. Elon Musk is getting close. 600 billion more, and the man is a trillionaire. Aren't you going to be proud that your country has a trillionaire? Come on. Come on, man.
Come on, man.
This hack says, consumers persistent whine. Why don't they just hire more people? Sounds feeble in this era of the Great Resignation, especially in industries such as food service with reputation for being tough places to work. Rather than living constantly with the verge of throwing a fit and risking taking it out on overwhelmed servers, struggling shop owners, or late arriving delivery people, we do ourselves a favor by consciously lowering expectations. Folks, yes, the shelves are empty. Prices are surging out of whack. Your wages are struggling to keep with this inflation. But you gotta lower your expectations. You people have high expectations. The problem will be solved if you lower your expectations. For example, if you are a millennial in your late 30s, perhaps early 40s, and you cannot afford a home, you cannot afford to get married, you cannot afford to have babies, you're living with 3 roommates, just lower your expectations. Is it really bad if you live down the street in a tent? Is it really bad to wait till you're 90 before you have kids and get married? Come on. Come on, man.
Come on, man.
Look at Hugh Hefner or Richard Gere. You can have kids in your 70s and 80s, no problem. And if you are a woman, and the window of the shop is about to close, and you want to have a baby, just lower your expectations. Come on, ma'am. Babies are horrible. They're loud and they cry and shit. Who needs babies? Just lower your expectations. You can have virtual babies, in the metaverse, where you don't have to pay for childcare, by the way. It is free, courtesy of Mark Zucchiniberg. Problem solved. Just lower your expectations, folks. Let your expectations go lower and lower and lower. And here is the reality, folks, about the so-called booming economy. Many Americans feel that the post-COVID life is further away. The number of Americans who expect that it will take more than a year to return to normal life has tripled since the summer. We are not doing any progress here, folks. The headline from the Washington Post: "The struggle is real. Why these Americans are still getting left behind in the recovery." Americans with college degrees fully recovered all pandemic job losses by May, while Americans without college degrees remain 4.5 million jobs below pre-pandemic levels. Black women are still the least recovered. But according to Professor Furman, we have a booming, thriving economy. According to Buttigieg, it is better than ever before. What's wrong with you folks? More reality, not the La La Land fantasies. Here is a poll from NPR, and the results are abysmal. The number of Americans who are in serious financial problems: among whites, 29% say that they have serious financial problems in this so-called booming economy. 32% of Asians, 50% of Native Americans, and 56% of blacks, and a stunning 57% of Latinos who say that they have serious financial problems in this so-called thriving economy. The poor tends to have more financial problems than the rich in this so-called V-shaped recovery in the thriving economy. 59% of those who earn less than $50,000 a year, 59% of those say that they have serious financial problems. So far, we're leaving black women, Latinos, Native Americans, and those earning less than $50,000, along with those without a college degree, all left behind in this economy. Among those earning less than $50,000 a year, 30% lost all their savings during the pandemic. Once again, among those with wages under $50,000 a year, 30% of those lost all savings. But Professor Furman says we gave everybody $2,000. This is why the economy is booming. More than a quarter of renters report serious problems paying rent in the past few months. 53% of renters in Houston are struggling to pay rent. 41% in Chicago. 35% in Los Angeles. 32% in New York City. This is the thriving economy that we have right now. And by the way, ironically, this poll is from Harvard, so Professor Furman should be familiar with these facts. A majority of households with school-aged children say that their kids have fallen behind in school because of the pandemic. 36% say that their kids fell behind a lot. We have a lost generation here, folks. This is once again the so-called booming economy. The days of cheaper rentals are over. Rents are soaring across the country, surging out of whack. We know that rents and shelter expenses are the primary expenses for the majority of households. When rents surge higher, out of whack, the purchasing power for the American consumer dwindles, and their standard of living also diminishes. This is, of course, the so-called booming economy. Americans are more pessimistic about life returning to normal, losing trust in Biden. More Americans now have a drawn-out timeline for the return to normal life after the coronavirus pandemic, while trust in President Biden on COVID-19 continues to erode. Part of that, of course, is the economic policies from this administration pushing inflation higher and intensifying the supply chain woes. Americans are paying insane prices for gasoline these days. Matter of fact, in the Bay Area, we have hit the highest price per gallon for gasoline in this country's history. And when Professor Furman says, you know what, if inflation goes a little higher, but wages also go higher, then what is the problem? So long as wages continue to go higher, inflation is just a high-class problem. Come on, man.
Come on, man.
Well, here are the facts. Inflation wiped out America's pay raises. What are they talking about here? Tommy, Luby, whatever your name is. Companies big and small are raising wages to attract workers and hold on to employees as the economy revs back into gear. Ha ha ha. But those fatter paychecks aren't going as far, thanks to rising inflation. In fact, compensation is now lower than it was in December 2019, when adjusted for inflation, according to an analysis by Jason Furman, an economic professor at Harvard University. This you, bro? You see, these swampy creatures have no shame at all. He contradicts himself right away. This is what he said. Inflation is eroding wage gains. With the other side of the mouth, he pukes out and says that inflation is a high-class problem. What the hell is wrong with you, Professor Furman? The Employment Cost Index, which measures wages and salaries along with health, retirement, and other benefits, fell in the last quarter and is 2% below its pre-pandemic trend. When taking inflation into account, wages and salaries are growing at a faster pace than benefits. The hot economy is heating prices more than it is heating wages, said the same asshole, Professor Furman. These people have no shame at all. U.S. consumer spending increases. Inflation eroding households' buying power. Here we go. More facts about this booming economy. Wages are rising, but inflation may have given workers a 2% pay cut. Believe it or not, your wages actually went down when you factor in inflation. Average hourly wages grew 3.6% in June relative to last year, the most in more than a decade. Good. No problems here. However, inflation essentially gave the average worker about a 2% pay cut, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, also known as the kitchen. So when the kitchen says inflation gave you 2% pay cut, the actual number is 5%. But the 2% is the cooked number. Inflation will hurt low-income Americans for years to come. What are they talking about? To understand why, imagine a family earning less than the median wage of about $58,000 a year pre-tax. Their after-tax income is even smaller, leaving less room for spending. Using data from the Kitchen in 2019 survey, my own calculations revealed that families earning $50,000 or less annually on average spend anywhere from 110% to 340% of their after-tax income on rent, food, and utilities each year. This means that many of these families are borrowing just to make ends meet. By comparison, families with average incomes above $50,000 spend as much as 98% of their incomes. Example, families earning $50,000 to $70,000 to as little as 62% for families earning $200,000 or more. Add in high prices, and this could likely mean that low and moderate income families will need to depend even more on debt to meet basic needs. This is your so-called booming economy. Indeed, during the pandemic, many low and moderate income families and retired persons received stimulus checks, and a portion of these checks were used to pay down debt. However, now, as these checks have been distributed and likely already spent, consumer credit, i.e. credit cards and financing, is on the rise again. Moreover, forbearances on mortgage debt, utilities, and rent payments are expiring soon. They already expired, by the way, meaning these families will be less shielded from rising inflation. You hear that, Professor Furman? It is also important to keep in mind what these households are spending on. Families earning $30,000 to $70,000 pre-tax spend 1/3 to 1/4 of their annual after-tax income on food, utilities, and rent. For families making $15,000 to $30,000, the share jumps to 47%. And for families making less than $15,000, it reaches an outsized 116%. Families making more than the median, by comparison, spend between about 7 and 19% of their after-tax income on such necessities. This is the thriving economy once again. You might say these poor people are poor because they're spending on stuff they don't need. No, they're spending on necessities, and they have to borrow to spend on necessities. Rising prices squeeze lower-income families who are already spending a disproportionate amount of their income just to get by. Indeed, the cost of food at home was above its pre-pandemic inflation rate of 1% year over year for 13 consecutive months during the pandemic, and at times exceeded 4% year over year. The annual inflation rate for meals purchased at eating and drinking places, for example, restaurants and bars, leapt 5.2% in May, according to the BEA. Meanwhile, energy prices are rising and low housing inventories are constraining the home buying market. Once again, the booming economy. Here is another fact. Pandemic has disrupted retirement plans for 35% of Americans, study finds. No big deal, just 35%. Could have been worse, right? You should lower your expectations anyways. Nearly 40% of U.S. households face financial difficulties amid the pandemic. More than 30% of people say their situation is worse, survey finds. 19% of households have depleted their savings. And here is yet another example of your so-called booming economy. Professor Furman. Remember the wages thing? If wages go higher, it's okay. Here's another fact for you. American household income fell in 2020, its first decline since 2011, census says. And this is the first time in decades where the U.S. government has increased the payments for Social Security to keep in pace with rising inflation. What about small businesses? They're getting decimated in this booming economy. The supply chain woes are impacting small businesses the most. Small businesses say their revenues are plummeting as they're forced to turn down business because of the labor shortage. And here's another stunning and absolutely horrific fact. More than half of black-owned businesses, small businesses, mom and pops, may not survive COVID-19. One report found 41% of black-owned businesses have been shuttered by COVID-19 compared to just 17% of white-owned businesses. These black-owned businesses, mom and pops, once again, about 40% of those businesses are gone. Where did the revenue and the flow of business went instead? It went to Walmart, Amazon, and Target. Thank you to the financial engineering and the insanity of these Harvard and Yale graduates, these Goldman Sachs and BlackRock graduates leading us. And if you thought Professor Furman, Mayor Pete, and that wackadoo from the Washington Post are out of touch, wait till you hear Propaganda Minister Psaki, who I have a degree of empathy with, because every time she wakes up in the morning, she says, okay, what shade of lipstick should I use today on the pig? Not on me, on the pig. The economic policies of this administration and the Federal Reserve. It's tough to put a lipstick on a pig every single day, but you shouldn't make it worse by a stupid comment like this. Take a look.
Right to vote. But
So just a question on the timing on the supply chain issue. Actions that the president has taken. It was clear in March of 2020 when COVID hit that the supply chains across the world had been disrupted. Even as the sort of work to fight back against COVID proceeded, it was crystal clear that things were not improving on supply chain. People couldn't get dishwashers and furniture and treadmills delivered on time, not to mention all sorts of other things. So why is
the tragedy of the treadmill that's delayed?
Right, the problem. But the serious point is, why didn't the president act sooner?
Well, Propaganda Minister, lady, maybe we need our treadmills because we are in a health crisis. You people locked us down, or we gained weight. We're unhealthy right now, and we need to exercise. And you continue with the fear porn, scaring people away from gyms, so we need treadmills and equipments at home. Obesity rates rise during the pandemic, fueled by stress, job loss, and sedentary lifestyle. Among those who reported gained weight, Gen Zers are suffering the most, believe it or not. Over 50%, once again, over 50% of Gen Zers reported weight gain during the pandemic. And pretty much in every single generation, over 20% reported extra weight gain due to the pandemic. When it comes to ethnicities, it is also across the board. Every American, Asian adults, white adults, black adults, Hispanic adults gain the most weight, while our billionaires gain billions of dollars every day. We, the people, we're gaining pounds. And no, I'm not talking about the British currency here. I'm talking about actual pounds. You know, kilograms. Fat, we got a lot of that. Thank you to the lockdown and the fear porn. So yes, perhaps we need our treadmills. We've been waiting. We paid for them. And we need them now, propaganda minister. Because average Americans are getting unhealthy, not just by weight gain alone and lack of exercise, but we're smoking more now. Smoking is on the rise. You know what else is on the rise? Perhaps you're familiar with this, Propaganda Minister Psaki, because you have to take a shot before the press conference, right? But you're not alone, because here it is. New study reveals almost 1 in 5 Americans drinking heavily during the pandemic. And I assure you, I am absolutely not in one of those 1 in 5 Americans who are drinking heavily during the pandemic. Trust me. But if you are, that's okay, because the majority of us, you're not alone, the majority of us have already adapted unhealthy lifestyle, and we need to reverse this right now. So when the propaganda minister says the tragedy of the treadmills, ha 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 ha, no, it's the tragedy of up. It's the tragedy of you more the Harvards and the Yales of the world who screwed up. And you have no empathy. You don't have the humility to understand what we're going through. A lot of these goods stuck at containers at the ports are food items, which will get bad by the time they arrive to warehouses. We have baby clothing, children clothing, which will go bad by the time households receive them. We have medical equipments, eyeglasses, hearing aids, canes, braces that people need desperately, stuck at these container ships. It's not the tragedy of the treadmill, you asshole. It's the tragedy of incompetence. And this tragedy will continue to go on and on and on. On a side note, you know, we make fun of your dear beloved leaders, and we criticize them all the time. But when things get a little serious, we display our empathy and compassion with them, even though they don't extend the same courtesy to us, but we're better than them. And therefore, we hope that Jen Psaki, who caught COVID recently, that she's going to recover soon and be back on her feet again, because what would I do without my propaganda minister? I need to watch The Freak Show every day. I need my dose of propaganda, right, Jen?
This is really becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Exactly. And folks, the reality is, so long as these pretentious assholes are in charge, they're gonna put the interest of the stock market and the donor class ahead of everything, ahead of the economy, because the stock market and the economy, two different things. And the problem is, we have leadership that is influenced by these so-called intellectuals who design and implement policies to benefit the stock market and the donor class. And you wonder why the economy is a shit show. What we need is a leadership influenced by the people, a leadership that places the average American and the economy's interest ahead of the stock market and the donor class. But do you think this will happen anytime soon? Of course not. So to conclude this video, 2 points. Point number 1, we need less Harvard and Yale in our lives. Number 2, certain people desperately want to bring out my inner Joe Goldberg.